Colin Aldrich never saw it coming. Everything about his life seemed to be going so well. He'd gotten a promotion at work 6 months ago, along with a nice bump in pay. Celia's interior design business was taking off, and she was now contributing meaningfully to their family income. The home they'd bought 2 years ago wasn't lavish, but it was large enough for their needs and in a good neighborhood. He and Celia had recently started talking about starting a family. So he wasn't looking for trouble when it hit him in the face. Colin couldn't help noticing the unfamiliar car parked in front of his house, but he wasn't concerned by its presence. He was concerned, however, when he came in from the garage and found Celia seated in the living room beside another man. When he entered the room, she immediately rose, and Colin couldn't help noticing how slim and attractive she looked. It was only when he focused on her face that he saw how nervous she looked. "Hey, sweetie," she greeted him. Then she gestured at the man still seated on the sofa. "You remember Vince Callahan," she said. "He's a client of mine. I've been redecorating his office. You two have met." "Oh, yeah, I remember now. Hi, Vince, nice to see you again. What brings you here?" Vince shot Celia an uncomfortable glance, and she cleared her throat. "Damn, this is so hard," she said in a low tone. Then she drew in a deep breath as if steeling herself for the ordeal to come. "Sweetie, there's really no other way to do this. I'm leaving you." The words made no sense to him. "What did you say?" She shook her head sadly. "I know this comes as a shock, but I've filed for divorce." He half stumbled to the chair facing the sofa and sat down heavily. "What? Why?" "We didn't mean for it to happen," she said remorsefully, "but Vince and I have fallen in love. We've been seeing each other for some time now, and we don't want to hide our love anymore." "You've been having an affair?" Colin said stupidly. She cast a quick glance at her paramour. "We didn't plan to, but after a while we just couldn't deny our feelings for each other. Anyway, I've already moved a load of my things in my car. I'll come back for the rest later." But, Colin stammered. She ignored his abortive protest and handed him the envelope he hadn't noticed. "So here are the papers and everything. I've tried to be very fair about the settlement, but, just so you'll know, I did go ahead and take half our savings out. Anyway, you'll want to get your own attorney to look these over. If you have a problem with anything, he or she can contact my attorney." I clipped her card onto the notice. Dumbly, he accepted the envelope, still trying to comprehend what was happening. As he sat there holding it, she walked back to Vince's side and took his hand. He stood, and the two of them moved to the door. "But why?" "What?" "I've already explained that," she interrupted. She nodded her head at Vince and he opened the front door. She turned back one last time. "So, I guess we're going now. And Colin, I really am sorry. I want you to know it wasn't you, it was me, okay?" Then they were gone, taking with them the happiness he'd enjoyed for the last 8 years. Colin had always considered himself level-headed. When faced with an emergency at work, he'd always been able to analyze the problem coolly and quickly before deciding on a course of action. Today, that capability deserted him. Now his thoughts were chaotic, jumping from one subject to another, unable to concentrate on any of them. How could I not have realized this was happening? Where can I find a good lawyer? How am I going to get ready for that meeting with Ferguson tomorrow morning? I wonder if Celia planned anything for dinner? How am I ever going to get through this? On and on his thoughts raced, circling and repeating, each clamoring for attention in his brain until he clapped his hands to his head trying to make them stop. In desperation he struggled to his feet and made his way back to the bedroom. Shedding his clothes, he let them lie where they fell, then crawled into bed in mental exhaustion. Remarkably, he soon fell asleep and stayed in bed until the next morning. When he awoke, the chatter of thoughts had subsided, but evidence of the new reality of his life was all around him. He immediately noticed that Celia wasn't sleeping beside him, and when he went to get dressed, he found her side of the closet empty. When he went out to the kitchen to make coffee, his footsteps seemed to echo in the empty house. Even when he looked out the window, the North Carolina morning seemed noticeably gloomier. Vince Callahan awoke to find Celia staring at the ceiling, her arms crooked behind her head. "Whatcha thinking, babe?" he asked. "I guess I was thinking about Colin," she replied. "I hope he's okay." "He'll be fine," Vince replied dismissively. "I hope so," she said. "He looked like he was in a state of shock when we left. I feel bad about that." I mean, it's not like he was bad husband. Things just got kind of stale, you know? Well, it's not gonna be that way with us, he vowed. You're gonna get plenty of excitement. At that he began kissing her passionately. Oh, Vince, she gasped, memories of last night's passion rapidly returning. Any thoughts of Colin rapidly evaporated in a sensual overload. Asterisk 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 asterisk. For most of the day, the envelope Celia had handed him sat on Colin's desk at the office. When he could procrastinate no longer, he opened it and began to read the divorce petition and the proposed financial settlement. But concentrating on the dry legal language was difficult because he didn't want a divorce in the first place. What he felt like doing was laying his head on his desk and crying, but he didn't want anyone in the office to see him that way. After a few minutes he got up and slowly made his way down the hall to his boss's office. The woman had hired him way back when, and he considered her his mentor. She looked up at him when he knocked on the door frame, then took a closer look. "Are you okay, Colin? You don't look so good." With a pained expression, he asked, "Do you know the name of a good divorce lawyer?" "Oh, damn, Colin, not you and Celia. Sit down." With that the woman got up and closed her office door. Then she took the side chair next to Colin and put her hand on his forearm. "Tell me what happened," she asked with obvious concern. This time Colin couldn't hide his tears. When Colin finally met with the attorney his boss had recommended, he soon wished he hadn't. The man's advice was, bluntly, to take what Celia had offered and run. "But I don't care how good her deal is," Colin protested. "I don't want to get divorced in the first place, and I sure don't want to pay her to dump me and live with some other guy." The lawyer sighed. "Look, you need to think rationally about this. You can't force your wife to stay married to you if she wants to leave. And honestly, you wouldn't want her to stay if all you're getting is an unhappy wife. As for paying her, you haven't seen it from my side of the desk. All Celia, it is Celia, right? All she's asking for is to split your current assets. She's not even asking for alimony. Apparently she's planning to remarry as soon as the divorce goes through. Listen, I've seen wives go after their husband's retirement accounts, demand crippling levels of alimony and petition for most of the family's assets, including the house. Your wife is being reasonable, don't piss her off and provoke her to become vindictive." "Maybe so," Colin said stubbornly, "but the fact remains that I still don't want a divorce." The attorney nodded and his tone grew sympathetic. "Listen, Colin, you don't want marital counseling from a lawyer. In the first place, I'm no good at it, and in the second place, I charge a lot more than any marriage counselor. If you're not ready to sign, my advice is to go find someone who can help you work through your feelings." When Colin told his boss about the meeting, she surprised him by handing him a business card. "I kind of thought that might be your reaction after we talked. I think you ought to go see Dr. Helmar. He's a psychologist who specializes in marital problems. I've had several other friends use him, and they all raved about him. Give him a try and see if he can help." In his third counseling session, Colin was repeating his litany of complaints when Dr. Helmar interrupted. "Look, Colin, let's be honest, you're stuck. What I want you to do is to change directions, mentally speaking. I'm sure you're familiar with the 5 stages of grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. What people get wrong about them is that they're not distinct from each other and you don't necessarily go through them in nice, neat steps. As I've listened to you, at one time or another I've heard you express all of the 5 stages but acceptance. That's perfectly natural for someone going through what you've experienced. But you've also told me you're a rational thinker, able to sort out problems and develop a solution. That's what you need to do now. Push aside the emotional stuff so you can devise a strategy that will allow you to move forward. Rationally, you know that Celia doesn't want to come back. Rationally, you understand that you wouldn't want her back if she doesn't want to be with you. Until you can accept the reality of those things, over which you have no control, I might add, you're going to continue to be stuck. You need to solve the problem of life after Celia based on the facts, just like you've done when confronted with other challenges in the past." Colin sat quietly, thinking about what the counselor had just said. Much of the pain he was feeling, he realized, stemmed from the crazy, unexpected way everything had happened. There'd been no warning, no signs that their marriage was in trouble. One day he'd been a happily married husband, the next he was headed for divorce. One day he'd believed that Celia loved him, The next he'd learn that she's been sleeping with another man. How can I move forward when I don't know what's real? And how can I move on when I'm dealing with all this anger? The counselor listened to Colin's outburst quietly. Once Colin fell silent, Dr. Helmar asked, "Have you ever heard of Reinhold Niebuhr?" Colin shook his head negatively. He was a widely recognized 20th-century theologian who composed a simple, powerful prayer: God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. That's the Serenity Prayer. I've heard of it, it's the Alcoholics Anonymous prayer. That's right. Anyway, in my mind, it encapsulates the passage through the stages of grief simply and eloquently. That's what you need to strive for: serenity, acceptance, and wisdom. Until you do that, you won't be able to move on. When Colin left his session that day, Niebuhr's prayer continued to replay in his mind. Serenity, that's what I want in my life. The question is, how do I achieve it? What can I do that will give me peace? After an entire weekend of reflection, he decided on a course of action. On Monday, Colin called his attorney. "I'll agree to everything Celia's asking for if I can sit down with her face to face for half an hour." "Are you sure?" the attorney asked. "I've seen face-offs like that go horribly awry, and very few of them satisfy either party in a divorce. This time will be different, I promise. Set it up." When Colin was ushered into the conference room of Celia's attorney, he was surprised to see Vince sitting beside her, holding her hand. Actually, this is good, Colin thought. Now Vince and Celia can both hear it for themselves. Celia's attorney gestured for him to begin, and Colin cleared his throat. "Look, Celia, this is as hard for me as it is for you. Things between us didn't work out the way I wanted, but I guess that's true about a lot of things in life. In this case, what's done is done, and now it's time for me to move on. My attorney has told me you've offered a fair settlement, and he's advised me to accept it. In the spirit of moving on, I'm ready to do so." He picked up the pen on the table and signed the agreement with a flourish. As the couple on the other side of the table exchanged a look of relief, he added, "There's just one more thing I want to say." The two froze, apprehensive about what might come next. "I understand that you plan to marry as soon as the divorce is final," Colin went on. "So in the spirit of moving on, let me wish you two all the happiness you deserve in your marriage." With that he walked around the table and shook hands with a startled Vince. Then he bent over and gave Celia a friendly hug and a kiss on the cheek. As the two lovers watched in surprise, he turned and left the room. They looked at each other. "Did that just happen?" Vince asked. Celia shook her head in amazement. "Wow, not what I was expecting." Then she smiled. "But it's wonderful. The last thing I wanted was a war between us every time we see him." With the terms of the divorce settled, it now fell to Colin to sell the house they jointly owned. Celia had no interest in the place because she had already moved into the home Vince owned. Colin did not have the funds necessary to buy Celia out, and even if he had, he knew the house was too large for him. Besides, there are too many memories, he decided. The good news was that the real estate market was strong, so selling the house would be no problem. The bad news was that since Colin and Celia had only bought the place 2 years ago, they hadn't built up that much equity, even in a strong market. Ultimately, Colin walked away from the closing with just enough cash to make a down payment on a 2-bedroom condominium in a nice development. By the time the old house was sold, his new condo purchased and Colin was moved in, the waiting period for the divorce was almost over. Through a friend, Colin learned that Vince and Celia had already sent out wedding invitations. Needless to say, Colin hadn't received an invitation, but he did hear that the happy couple would leave for a week-long Caribbean honeymoon. He made his plans accordingly. When the suntanned couple returned, Vince swept Celia off her feet in preparation for carrying her over the threshold. But as he stepped inside, he spotted an index card that had been slipped under the door. "Check your back deck," it read. Concerned, he set his new wife on her feet, grabbed her hand and hurried out to the deck. At first he saw nothing out of the ordinary, but when he turned to one side, his eyes widened and he gasped. Sitting there gleaming was a deluxe 3-burner propane gas grill, hooked up and ready to go. He turned back to Celia. "Did you get this for me? I've always wanted one, but they're so expensive." "No," she admitted, "I don't know anything about it." Before she could speculate, she spotted an envelope taped to the grill's gleaming stainless steel hood. Hurrying over, she pulled it off and opened it. When she read the card inside, she was the one to gasp. "I can't believe it, this came from Colin. It says, 'Best wishes on your new marriage.'" "Colin gave this to us?" Vince asked unbelievingly. "If this is what he meant by 'moving on,' all I can say is he's a bigger man than I am. This is an amazing gift, I'm going to love grilling on it this summer." "I've got to call and thank him," Celia said, as Vince checked out the features of the grill. When Colin picked up the phone, he could hear a mix of surprise, gratitude, and even a touch of guilt in Celia's voice. "Colin, we just found your wedding present. I can't believe you bought that expensive grill for us. It's too much." "Didn't Vince like it?" "Like it? He's still out on the deck drooling over it." "Good, that's what I hoped. But you didn't have to do something like this. We didn't even send you a wedding invitation." Colin laughed. "Of course not, that would have been too weird. But I meant what I said, it's time for me to accept what's happened and move on. The gift is just my way to show I've done that. So I hope you and Vince enjoy it." When Celia went back out to the deck to tell Vince, he shook his head in wonder. "Like I said, he's a better man than I am. Anyway, how about I grill some burgers for dinner tonight, Mrs. Callahan?" As April turned into May, Celia and Vince began making plans to celebrate Mother's Day with Celia's mom. They discussed taking her out for brunch to a nice restaurant, but when they proposed the idea, her mother was reluctant. "It's always such a madhouse on Mother's Day. I'd be just as happy if you two came here for brunch." So plans were made, with the newlyweds to bring over a special meal that featured salmon and vegetables grilled on Vince's new favorite toy. On the way over, Celia asked her husband, "Did you remember to get some flowers for Mom?" Face-palming himself, Vince quickly turned off the highway and pulled into the lot of a regional grocery store chain. Soon he returned with a dozen pink roses. "They're a little the worse for wear," he apologized to Celia, "but it's the thought that counts." After arriving and bringing their dishes into the kitchen, Vince handed the roses to Celia's mother with Happy Mother's Day wishes. "Thank you, Vince, that's so nice," she told him. "I'll put them in a vase later." Then she suggested they serve themselves in the kitchen and bring the plates into the dining room. "Your dad is starving," she whispered to her daughter. As they brought the food in, Celia couldn't help noticing the lavish floral arrangement sitting in the middle of the dining room table. "Mom, those are gorgeous," she said. "Did Dad give those to you?" Her mother snickered. "Him? He told me I'm not his mother. Actually, Colin sent them to me. Aren't they lovely?" "Colin? I know. Wasn't that sweet of him?" her mother said. As Celia nodded, she noticed a scowl flit across her new husband's face. Later that afternoon, when the couple was home and Celia had a few minutes to herself, she called Colin. "Why did you send that floral arrangement to my mother?" she demanded. "Oh, good, they got there in time. Did she like them?" "Of course she loved them," Celia acknowledged. "They were lovely. But why did you send them?" Colin sighed. "Your mom has always been really sweet to me, and since my mother passed away years ago, I always felt close to yours. So I wanted to honor her. I hope that's not a problem." No, not at all. Like I said, she really appreciated your thoughtfulness. It's just something I wasn't expecting, that's all. Honestly, I really appreciate it as well." "Okay, well if I haven't made a huge faux pas, I have a favor to ask of you." Sure. What is it?" "This is a little awkward, but I think that the time is right for me to start getting back in the dating game." He could almost hear her hesitation. "Colin, I'd feel really uncomfortable trying to set you up with a date." "Oh, no, nothing like that. It's just that I can see myself inviting a date back to my condo and, to be honest, right now it looks a little barren, more like a guy's crash pad. Could I hire you to redecorate? You've always had much better taste than me." "Wow, I wasn't expecting that. But sure, I guess I could do that. I've just finished up a big design project, so I could get on it right away. Is there a time next week when I could come by and have a look?" "Sure. I'm now working from home 3 days a week, so Monday, Tuesday, or Wednesday would work for me." "Great. I'll plan to come over Tuesday afternoon." When Colin let her into his condo the next Tuesday, Celia immediately saw what he'd been talking about. The walls were all painted an off-white color, the carpet was outdated and faded, and the furniture was mostly what he'd rescued from their old home. "I feel like we could go in a lot of different directions here," she told him after surveying the place. "Why don't you tell me what kind of style you want?" He shrugged his shoulders helplessly. "Honestly, Celia, I don't know much about style or color theory or any of that stuff." He looked around for a moment uncertainly, then brightened. "What I'd really like is for you to design a place that would appeal to you." He waved his hands quickly. "I don't mean something all feminine and pink, I definitely want it to look like a straight male is living here. But I don't want it to look like a sports bar." He gestured in her direction. "Just some place that would appeal to someone like you, a place where a woman with good taste would feel comfortable. You're the only one I'd trust to do it." "That's really flattering, Colin. Actually, I think I know exactly what you're looking for. Let me go back to my studio and work up a plan. Then I'll get back to you with some options and we can see what you like." "Perfect. Thanks, Celia, I really appreciate this." Over the next 2 months, Celia wound up getting together with Colin almost once a week. They had to select a design plan, review and fine-tune proposed decor and then oversee the renovations they'd agreed on. After that she was constantly bringing fabric swatches, paint samples and furniture photos for his approval. Colin was pleased with the progress being made, but Vince was another matter. "Do you have to keep seeing that guy so often?" he complained to his wife one evening after she'd returned from yet another visit to Colin's condo. "Come on, honey, I don't meet with Colin any more often than any other client I've had. And besides, I thought you were comfortable with him, especially after his wedding gift to us." "I think he really has put all that in the past," she soothed. "Yeah, maybe. But you two have a history, and I can't help wonder if he's truly over you." "Well, I'm over him. In fact, if you'll come back in the bedroom with me, I'll show you just how completely over him I am." Although Celia felt she had soothed Vince's jealousy, she feared Colin's next request had the potential to reignite her husband's temper. During one of her visits, he asked her out of the blue, "Do you still belong to a book club?" Yes, I do. We meet every other Saturday afternoon." "Why? Is the club just for women only, or would you consider letting a man join?" "I don't know, I don't think we've ever had a man ask to join." "Why, are you interested?" "Actually, I am. I told you I wanted to start dating again, but I really don't know what to talk about with a woman. Most gals I know aren't that interested in sports, so we probably don't have anything in common. I figure that if I knew more about books my date might be reading, that would at least give me a way to start a conversation." She nodded. "Okay, I can see that. Actually, that sounds pretty insightful on your part. How does this sound? At our book club's next meeting, I'll raise the question. If they're okay with it, I'll let you know and you can come to the following meeting. If not, I can at least let you know what book we chose so you can read it on your own." "I really appreciate it, Celia. Obviously, I'd prefer to participate in a discussion and hear what you ladies think about the book. But if they're uncomfortable with a masculine presence, I'll do the reading on my own." When Celia broached the subject to her book club friends, she was pleasantly surprised to find they were enthusiastic about Colin joining their group. "As long as you're not uncomfortable with having your ex-husband there, we'd love to have a male view," they told her. Celia was amused to note that the two ladies who were single seemed the most enthusiastic about having Colin join. At Colin's first meeting, he completely won over even the members who had voiced reservations. Unlike a couple of the ladies, Colin had actually finished the book and was able to make several insightful comments. Yet he was also careful not to dominate the discussion. Celia was relieved to see Colin was respectful of differing opinions and repeatedly encouraged the others for their thoughts. At the end of the session, everyone declared the experiment to have been a great success, and Colin got hugs from everyone as they left. The single members, Celia noted again, were especially exuberant in their demonstrations of appreciation. Not only did Colin attend the next meeting, but he invited the group to hold their session at his newly redecorated condominium. When they arrived, the ladies spent the first half-hour oohing and awing about the decor, and Colin went out of his way to emphasize that it was all Celia's doing. It was the custom for the host of the meeting to offer snacks and drinks for the session. Colin had gone the extra mile, providing a couple of charcuterie boards for his guests to nibble from plus several bottles of Prosecco to keep the conversation well lubricated. The book discussion that followed might not have sparkled intellectually, but it was definitely animated. When it was time to go, everyone was effusive in their thanks. One of the single ladies, a cute young redhead named Kelly, was so persistent in expressing her gratitude that Celia felt compelled to pry Colin away with a made-up errand. When everyone else had left, Celia remained, offering to help Colin clean up. He gratefully accepted. After the used plates and glasses were transferred to the dishwasher, he walked her out to the entrance. Taking her hands in his, he thanked her for her help and for supporting his addition to the group. She shook her head. "Actually, it's me who should be thanking you. Everyone had a great time, as you could probably tell, and I think you added a lot to our discussion. Plus I really appreciate all your compliments about the decor. That was really sweet of you." "You're very welcome," he responded. "And thank you for delivering me from Kelly," he added slyly. Instantly, she stiffened. "You need to watch out for her, Colin. She's a sweet girl, but she's a little young for you. And from what I hear, she's a bit of a man-eater, if you know what I mean." He nodded solemnly, hiding his amusement at her reaction. Celia's smile returned. "I need to get home, but thank you again for everything." She leaned in to give him a hug and a kiss on the cheek. Then she pulled back and eyed him carefully. "I feel like I'm seeing another side of you, Colin. I like it." She kissed his cheek once more, then turned and left. When Vince learned about the newest member of Celia's book club, he was audibly upset, demanding that she tell Colin not to come anymore. She, in turn, was clearly irritated. "I'll do nothing of the sort," she shot back. "The other gals love him, and he looks like a great addition to our group. So just knock it off with the jealous act, Vince. Nothing's going on, and you look silly acting like there is." Vince managed to keep his feelings to himself, but that night he felt a powerful urge to reclaim his wife as his own. Their lovemaking was unusually vigorous. Vince seemed determined to reassert his dominance, skimping on foreplay and penetrating her before she was fully aroused. Celia realized what was happening and decided it was wiser not to protest. But she faked her orgasm to provoke Vince to reach his own climax quicker. Afterwards, she kissed him and thanked him, but when he had fallen asleep, she slipped out of bed and took an Advil. The next morning Vince sheepishly apologized for the way he had treated her, but she blew off his concerns. "I wouldn't want it like that every time," she told him, "but sometimes a change of pace is nice." Relieved, he went off to work with a light step. Once he was gone, her forced smile quickly faded. Slipping on a sundress, Celia discovered she was still sore from last night, and got another. Once she downed the capsule with her breakfast, she drove to her design studio to see what was on the schedule for the new week. When she saw that an area rug for Colin's condo had been delivered, she quickly called him to offer to bring it over. His okay galvanized her. After checking her makeup, she headed his way. Once he'd let her in, she quickly placed the small rug where it was intended. Colin complimented her selection and then invited her to stay a minute and have a cup of coffee. She readily accepted. As she plopped down on his new sofa, however, she grimaced, and Colin immediately picked up on it. "Is something wrong, Celia?" he asked, a tone of concern in his voice. "It's nothing," she said. "Vince got a little aggressive with me last night, and I'm a bit sore this morning, that's all." She couldn't help noticing the frown that swept over his face, only for it to be replaced by a look of determination. Without a word he pulled the coffee table away from the sofa. Then he grabbed his new area rug and spread it out in front of her. After laying a throw pillow in the middle, he beckoned for her to stretch out on the rug. She gave a half-hearted protest but yielded when he insisted. Once she was face down on the rug, her hips elevated by the pillow, he straddled her and began to rub her neck, starting at the base of her skull. As his fingers stroked and pressed, the tension began to seep out of her body and she gave a contented groan. From there his hands moved down to her shoulders and then along her spine, working on her lats. Soon Celia was purring like a contented cat as he kneaded her sore back muscles. "God, Colin, that feels heavenly. I'm turning into putty." He made no reply. Instead he lowered her feet and began slowly to work his way back up her calves, first pressing into her Achilles tendons, then lightly dragging his fingertips over her skin. He smiled to himself as he noticed her breathing accelerate. As his fingers made their way north of her knees, she felt cool air on the backs of her legs. Sluggishly she realized that he must have slid her skirt up out of his way. A murmured protest died on her lips as he slowly, lightly inched his way higher. When he began to run his fingers up and down, she gave a little moan. Abruptly he halted, but before she could object, she felt his weight on her back, pressing her body into the rug. She liked the idea that he could do whatever he wanted to her. She longed for him to take her, and now he did. After a few minutes he rolled onto his back, and Celia squirmed around to throw her arm over him, laying her head on his chest. She started to say something but stopped herself, not daring to voice what she was thinking. Instead, she snuggled closer, enjoying the warmth of his body. The quiet of their breathing was interrupted by Celia's ringtone. She started to ignore it, then reluctantly pulled her phone out of her bag. When she saw who was calling, she sat upright and made the connection. "Hi, Vince, what's up? Sorry I missed your call earlier, I was out running some errands." "No, I've got nothing going on right now." "Sure, lunch sounds good, where do you want to meet?" "Okay, great, I can be there in half an hour. Love you, babe." She turned and looked apologetically at Colin. "I'm sorry, I have to go." She scurried into his guest bathroom and cleaned herself up as best she could. When she re-emerged, she walked to the door. But before leaving she turned to him. "We need to talk, I'll call you." Colin nodded his understanding, and she disappeared. Over lunch, Vince again questioned her about where she'd been and what she'd been doing, but Celia elaborated on her earlier excuses. Eventually he dropped the subject. He thought he detected something different about her, but he couldn't put his finger on what had changed. That night, he wanted sex with her again, and ignored her claim of being too tired. She'd managed to take a shower at home after he'd gone back to his office, but she was still frightened that he might find some evidence of her infidelity. However, Colin had been so gentle in his lovemaking that Colin found no hint of her tryst. The next day Colin was busy on his computer in the home office when his cell rang. Checking the display, he was not surprised to see that Celia was calling. She begged to see him so they could talk, and he invited her to come right over. After disconnecting, he quickly finished the report he'd been working on for his office, then prepared a text message on his other phone. When he got the signal from the security door of the condo and heard it was Celia, he pressed send on the phone, then buzzed her in. Pulling open his front door, he found Celia standing there, a troubled expression on her face. She stepped inside and he closed it behind her, then turned to stare at her intently. "Colin, we have to talk about what happened yesterday," she began, but he pressed his fingers to her lips to stop her. She stared at him in confusion until he stepped closer to her and replaced his fingers with his lips. "Oh, God," she gasped before returning his kiss with passion. Between the two of them they managed to strip each other, then Colin scooped Celia up in his arms and deposited her on his bed. This time there was no slow build-up. Colin was in no mood to wait. Vince had been working at his desk when an anonymous text message hit his personal cell. "If you want to find Celia, you should check in Colin's bedroom," it read. "Who is this?" he typed back, but got no reply. Ordinarily he would have ignored a text from an unknown phone, but the message fed the paranoia he'd been feeling for some time now. Grabbing his car keys he rushed to the office garage and tore off for Colin's condo. Vince roared into Colin's condo development parking lot. When he spotted Celia's car, he slammed to a halt in front of the main entrance, not bothering to look for a parking slot. As he jumped out of his car, he saw a resident leaving, and he rushed to catch the security door before it could close. Bursting inside, he paused in the entryway to get his bearings. Then he took the stairs up to the second floor, not wanting to risk having Colin and Celia hear the elevator. Exiting the stairwell, he hurried straight to the entrance of Colin's condo. His first thought was to throw his shoulder into the door and burst in, but when he grabbed the doorknob, it turned readily in his hand. "The stupid forgot to lock the door," he exulted. Slipping into the condo, he stealthily made his way back to the main bedroom. There was no doubt about where to go or what he would find, he could clearly hear Celia's moans and curses. Just as he rounded the entrance, she screamed, arching her back. Then, as he watched in agony, she collapsed on Colin's chest. "What the fuck, Celia?" Vince roared. "How could you do this to me, especially with him?" Shocked, she jerked her head around to see the one person she most wanted to avoid. Vince stood there in obvious pain and anger, his fists clenched, tears streaming down his cheeks. "No, Vince, no, you have to let me explain." She started, but Vince would have none of it. There's nothing to explain, you dirty cheater. You've broken my heart, I never want to see you again. With that he turned and blindly staggered out of the bedroom, heading for the front door. Wait, Vince, stop. You don't mean that. Just wait a second, Celia cried out, desperately pulling on her clothes so she could follow her husband. Colin silently watched Celia go. Then he got dressed and went back to his office. Noticing the burner phone he'd left on his desk, he picked it up and tossed it in the trash can. I don't think I'll need that anymore, he told himself. As the phone hit the bottom of the can, the last text he'd sent flashed on the screen. If you want to find Celia, you should check in Colin's bedroom. He was still working when he was interrupted by a timid knock on the front door. When he opened it, Celia came trudging in, tugging a large rolling suitcase behind her. She turned to face him, and Colin saw that her eyes were red and her makeup had run down her cheeks. Vince kicked me out, she said tearfully. How's he doing? Colin asked. He's a wreck, she told him. 1 minute he was screaming at me, the next he was sobbing his heart out. I could hardly understand anything he was saying. The only thing that was clear that the sight of me was killing him and that he wanted me gone as soon as possible. She shook her head. I'm really worried about him, but I don't know what I can do. Colin nodded. I know the feeling. Then her somber expression lightened. But at least you and I can be together now. We don't have to hide what we feel for each other. She raised her arms to embrace him, only to be halted by his response. I don't think so. She was confused, not only by his words but even more by his tone. What did you say? She asked. Actually, you're right, Celia, we don't have to hide our feelings any longer. And my feelings are that I wouldn't have you back if you were the last woman alive. I'd be crazy to take back a cheater, no, make that a 2-time cheater, into my life. She was shocked by his outburst, but quickly tried to regain the advantage. Maybe I did cheat on Vince, but I did it to make up for my mistake in leaving you. Now I'm back, and I'm going to spend the rest of my life showing you how loving and faithful I can be. You really are a piece of work, Colin sneered. You treat men like interchangeable parts, get tired of one, swap him out for another. If the second doesn't work out, no problem, just go back to the first one again. That's not fair, Colin. Besides, you wanted me, you seduced me. He nodded his head in sarcastic agreement. Oh, sure, I get it. All it takes is for some guy to be civil to you, pay you a few compliments, maybe give you a present, and you'll drop your panties in a heartbeat. No, it's not like that. It's exactly like that, and I have no doubt that if I did take you back, the same thing would happen again. Well, I have news for you, Celia, I've seen what you're really like. Like the song said, we are never ever getting back together. He stepped over to the front door, yanked it open and tossed her bag out in the hallway. Get out, he yelled. Tears were streaming down her face, her breath caught between sobs. Oh, God, I can't believe this is happening. Where am I going to go? He crossed his arms on his chest. If you want my suggestion, I'd recommend straight to hell. Shrinking in the face of his anger, she staggered back through the doorway, and Colin quickly slammed it shut, making sure to throw the deadbolt this time. Then he went over to his sofa and plopped down, feeling the adrenaline slowly ebb out of his system. As he began to relax, he thought about everything that had happened. I wonder what Dr. Helmar would say about all this. After all, I did follow at least some of his guidance. I found the wisdom to figure out what I could change, and the courage to make changes, even if I had to hold my nose sometimes doing it. But I'll leave finding acceptance to Vince and Celia. He shook his head. I don't think it will be easy for either of them to achieve serenity. Vince has to accept being a cuckold who's about to be divorced. Celia has to accept being a cheating slut who's been kicked out of her house and is about to be divorced for the second time. He smiled grimly. Maybe I should send them Dr. Helmar's name. Satisfied, he looked around, admiring his redecorated condo. Then he walked back to his office and sat at his desk. As he did so, he noticed the card he'd kept with Kelly's name and number. On the back was a handwritten note that read, "Give me a call sometime." He nodded to himself. I think I'm ready to do just that.